I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. Russia claims Ukrainian forces have attacked a fuel depot inside Russia. Verified videos circulating online show an airstrike and subsequent fire at an oil depot in the city of Belgorod. But a spokesperson for Ukraine says he won't comment on what he calls Russian fakes. The UK Defense Ministry says Ukrainian forces have made successful but limited counterattacks, retaking 2 more villages south of Chernihiv along one of the main supply routes between the city and Kyiv. Meanwhile, the International Atomic Energy Agency says that radiation around Chernobyl is normal after Russian forces abandoned the decommissioned nuclear power plant. Our foreign correspondent James Longman is in Kyiv with the latest.
A possible strike on Russian territory on an oil depot in Belgorod, just over the Ukrainian border. In these videos posted online, you can see 2 airstrikes in the distance. You can also see 2 helicopters flying next to where the strikes have hit. And then this video posted online shows oil tanks on fire and a huge cloud of smoke rising from the depot. Russia has accused Ukraine of carrying them out. This as Russia is forced to abandon nuclear power plant Chernobyl, which they seized in February. According to unconfirmed reports, Russian troops may have suffered acute radiation sickness and may have gone back to Belarus for treatment. Ukraine's state nuclear company said Russian forces dug trenches in the most contaminated areas around the plant. But as some Russian forces reposition, U.S. officials are wary of Moscow's claims.
We don't see any indication that they're going to be sent home.
And 2 missile strikes on the capital yesterday, one hitting while I was live on air.
We just heard an enormous explosion here towards the north of where we're standing. And you can see there deep, dark smoke rising into the sky. Now, we're not sure what's been hit.
More strikes in Ukraine's second-largest city, Kharkiv, neighborhoods ablaze. And now U.S. intelligence reports saying some senior Russian officials likely disagreed with Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. This as U.S. officials also said some advisors are too afraid to tell him the truth. President Biden touching on Putin and those advisors.
He seems to be self-isolated, and there's some indication that he has fired or put under house arrest some of his advisors.
The siege of Mariupol does continue. Some 100,000 people are still stuck in that city. Ukraine says Russian troops have essentially locked it down, not allowing help in from the Ukrainian side. And Russia has previously said that they are there to stay. Diane?
All right, James Longman in Kyiv, Ukraine. James, thank you. And President Biden says Americans are back at work in what he calls a historic economic recovery. The U.S. added 431,000 jobs in March, slightly lower than analysts expected, but still a strong sign. And the unemployment rate dropped to 3.6%, down from 3.8% a month ago. Let's bring in ABC News contributor Alexis Christoforous for more on all of this. Alexis, just from a general standpoint, what do you make of these numbers and the way the president is characterizing them?
I think when you look at the numbers, just at the top line, there's never been a better time to look for a job. I mean, we've got a very strong and resilient job market, 11.3 million job openings, and not enough people to fill them. So as the president said just a short time ago, he said workers now have the power to get better wages. People are leaving their jobs with confidence they can get better jobs and higher pay elsewhere. And the 3.6% unemployment rate you're seeing here, almost at pre-pandemic levels, Diane, because in February of 2020, the unemployment rate was at 3.5%. We should probably hit that in the next month or 2.
And the president pointed to this record in wage growth. Yeah. But we heard one of the reporters shout to him as he was walking out, but what about inflation? Something the president did not address in this speech. We know wages have gone up, but not as much as inflation. So put these numbers into context for us.
And that's on everybody's mind, especially voters, as they're going to be voting in the midterm elections. So wages went up pretty healthy over the past year, up about 5.5%, but inflation outstripped that, now at a 40-year high of nearly 8%. So our dollar doesn't have the same power it held just a year ago, and we're starting to see our household spending is starting to pull back a little bit as people now think, well, do I really need to take that trip? Do I really need to go out to a restaurant tonight? And they're going to start rethinking that as the months go on.
And then the big one, gas prices. We're seeing gas prices essentially skyrocket. The president announced just yesterday they'll start to release 1 million barrels of oil a day from the strategic reserves. How much do you think that will help in the short run and the long run?
Short run is really it, because that's what it's going to help. It's not a long-term solution. The president called it a wartime bridge. It's not going to replace all the Russian oil that's being taken off the market. 1 million barrels a day sounds like a lot. It represents about 5% of what we go through here in the U.S. So we should see gas prices come down in the coming weeks, anywhere from 25 to 35 cents a gallon. The problem with this is lots of folks say it's short-sighted, because he's pulling down those reserves, those strategic reserves, which are emergency reserves, to their lowest level since 1984, and we're going to have to replenish them at some point. And the question is, at what price do we replenish them?
And you talked about the number of jobs that are open, not enough people to fill them, wages are up. What does that mean for business owners right now and the general growth of the economy?
For business owners, it's really competitive. They're looking for workers in a smaller pool of available workers, so they have to compete with other companies, which is why, for the first time in a long time, workers are actually in the driver's seat. They're walking in and saying, this is the salary I want, here's the flexibility I want. For the first time, Diane, too, in a long time, we're seeing folks get benefits if they're working less than 40 hours a week. So right now, employers are really doing all they can to attract and keep the right talent.
And then the other big question is how the Federal Reserve responds to all of this, right? Because as you said, those inflation numbers are still ticking up, and everyone's always watching the Fed to see what's going to happen with interest rates. What do you think?
I think that the Federal Reserve is going to read today's report and go, yep, the economy is strong enough to take those higher interest rates. They've laid out a very aggressive plan to raise interest rates over the next few months. After a report like this, no reason to believe they're going to back down now, because the fear is not so much that they're going to push the economy into a recession. They need to get these high inflation numbers down.
All right, Alexis Christoforous, thank you so much for being here. Coming up, our exclusive interview with Oscars producer Will Packer, breaking his silence about what happened behind the scenes after Will Smith slapped Chris Rock. Stay with us. Welcome back. Oscars producer Will Packer is breaking his silence and speaking out for the first time about what went on behind the scenes after Will Smith slapped Chris Rock. Packer spoke about Rock's reaction once he walked off the stage and how the LAPD was ready to arrest Smith, but Rock said not to. TJ Holmes has that ABC News exclusive interview.
It sounds like Chris Rock had the ability, the option, to have the LAPD go arrest and remove Will Smith from that theater that night.
That's an absolute fact. The LAPD made it clear, we will do whatever you want us to do, and one of the options is that we will go and arrest him right now.
Will Packer is breaking his silence, giving details about what happened backstage in the immediate aftermath of that Oscar night shocker when Will Smith walked onto the stage and slapped comedian Chris Rock.
Will Smith just smacked the out of me.
That moment came after what we now know was an unscripted joke from Rock about Smith's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, who's recently been vocal about her battle with alopecia.
Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right?
You're sitting, monitors around you. Tell me what's in your room around you.
I said, watch this. He's going to kill. Because I knew he had an amazing lineup of jokes that we had. We had him in the prompter. And ultimately, he did not get to one joke. He didn't tell one of the planned jokes. He was just immediately freestyling. But I tell you, if there's anybody that you don't worry about going out in front of a live audience and riffing off the cuff, it's Chris Rock. Nobody's better.
But even as Smith made his way up on stage, Packer wasn't worried.
And I thought this was part of something that Chris and Will were doing on their own. I thought it was a bit. I thought it was a bit like everybody else. I knew we hadn't practiced it.
Not concerned.
I wasn't concerned at all.
As he's walking.
I figured, okay, you know, he's going to say something or come at him. Something funny is going to happen because that's the nature of Chris and that's the nature of Will. So let's see what happens.
Keep my wife's name out your mouth. I'm going to, okay?
Once I saw Will yelling at the stage with such vitriol, my heart dropped. And I just remember thinking, oh no, not like this. And Chris was keeping his head when everybody else was losing theirs. And then, you know, gave the quote.
That was a greatest night in the history of television. Okay.
But my heart at that point was just in my stomach because of everything about it and what it represented and what it looked like and who was involved. all of that was just, I've never felt so immediately devastated like I did in that moment.
But it still wasn't until Rock walked backstage that Packer was finally convinced that Smith had actually struck him.
The winners are walking off stage. Chris is with them. And I immediately go up to Chris.
And you say what or you do what?
I said, did he really hit you? And he looked at me and he goes, yeah. He goes, I just took a punch from Muhammad Ali, as only Chris can. He was immediately, you know, in joke mode, but you could tell that he was very much still in shock.
It's fascinating to hear that you had a few minutes to try to process or understand what had just taken place, but not until Chris Rock came off stage. You still were not sure if he'd been hit.
I knew it was clearly a confrontational moment because of what was happening from Will in the audience, but I still wasn't sure that he had actually struck him. I made that clear, like, Rock, you tell me, whatever you want to do, brother. And he was telling me, I'm fine. Let's just get past this. I'm getting out of here. I can't believe this happened. The LAPD came and needed to talk to Chris. And so they came into my office and they were laying out very clearly what Chris's rights were. And they were saying, this is battery. We will go get him. We are prepared. We're prepared to get him right now. You can press charges. We can arrest him. As they were talking, Chris was, he was being very dismissive of those options. He was like, no, I'm fine. He was like, no. And even to the point where I said, Rock, let him finish. And they said, you know, would you like us to take any action? And he said, no. He said no. And I didn't have any conversation with Will.
But the Academy says they asked Smith to leave, which he refused.
A lot of folks immediately will wonder why he got up, walked that far, assaulted somebody, went back to his seat and was allowed to stay.
Right.
What was the conversation behind the scenes?
It happened to be right before the Best Actor Award. Shayla told me that they were about to physically remove Will Smith. And I had not been a part of those conversations. And so I immediately went to the Academy leadership that was on site and I said, Chris Rock doesn't want that. I said, Rock has made it clear that he does not want to make a bad situation worse. That was Chris's energy. His tone was not retaliatory. His tone was not aggressive and angry. And so I was advocating what Rock wanted in that time, which was not to physically remove Will Smith at that time, because as it has now been explained to me, that was the only option at that point. It has been explained to me that there was a conversation that I was not a part of to ask him to voluntarily leave.
Will Smith later said on Instagram, I would like to publicly apologize to you, Chris. I was out of line and I was wrong. I'm embarrassed and my actions were not indicative of the man I want to be.
When did you finally get a chance to touch base with Will Smith?
Will Smith reached out to me the next morning and said, and he apologized. And he said, you know, this should have been a gigantic moment for you. And he expressed his embarrassment, and that was the extent of it.
And Diane, we did get word that reportedly Will Smith did apologize to some members of the board via Zoom this week, but also on the 18th, the board is expected to have the Board of Governors is expected to have another meeting, and at that point, we could get word about what punishment could come down for Will Smith. Diane.
All right, our thanks to TJ Holmes for that interview. And I'd like to bring in Kelly Carter, senior entertainment reporter at ESPN's Anscape and host of the ABC News Close-Up podcast. Kelly, thanks for being here. I know Will Packer's a friend of yours. What did you think hearing his account of the way everything went down?
I mean, I think what we really know even more is how much of a professional Chris Rock is. And also, I think we can't ignore the elephant in the room. Chris Rock has used his comedic stage for the entirety of his career to talk about race and race relations in America. And I feel like in that moment, Chris deciding not to have LAPD press charges against Will Smith is because Chris is a black man in America and knows what the optics are, but he also knows what the reality is of that situation. And I think he also made that choice cognitively because of that.
And Packer makes it sound like they really left that decision up to Chris Rock on whether to arrest Smith or even physically remove him. But Wanda Sykes, one of the night's hosts, called it gross that they let Will stay. And she says, you assault somebody, you get escorted out of the building. That's it. So what did you make of that? Why ask him to leave rather than force him to leave?
I think that everything probably happened so quickly. They had very few seconds, really, to make that call. And I think everybody there probably was really concerned about the optics of what it would look like to forcibly remove not only black man, but Will Smith, who happens to be one of the biggest box office stars in the world, from that auditorium, minutes away from him winning his first Oscar, which everyone knew he was about to win his first Oscar.
Now, how much of this was complicated by how long it took for everybody to realize that this was real? Because any normal audience member goes up and smacks a comedian, they get escorted right away because you know that was a real assault. But in this case, you're hearing Will Packer, the lead producer of the show, say, I didn't know that it was real until Will started shouting. And even then, I wasn't sure if the smack was real until I spoke to Chris Rock myself.
Yeah, Will Packer is all of us, because even in the auditorium, when Will was approaching Chris Rock, we know that Will Smith and Jada and Chris Rock are friends. You know, Chris and Jada have worked together in films. So we know that there's a friendship of some sort or some type of professional relationship at the very least. And so everyone assumed that this was a bit. I did initially. And when Chris immediately said that Will smacked the bleep out of him, I was like, oh, wait, no, I don't know if that was a joke. But like Will Packer said, it was clear that it was a confrontation of some sort once Will got back to his seat and started yelling expletives at Will. It was deathly silent in the auditorium. I really never say this, but you honestly could hear a pin drop as Will was shouting out at Chris Rock. There was no other chatter. There was no laughter. There was nothing but hearing Will's voice boom in that auditorium.
Now, the Academy says they're conducting a formal review. What do you think the consequences will be for Will Smith, and what do you think they should be?
This is completely unprecedented, so all of us are waiting with bated breath to see what happens. It sounds like what's on the table is that they could suspend him from the Academy, remove him from the Academy, prevent him from not coming back, or worse, take his Oscar away. We don't know what's going to happen, but we're all watching and waiting to see what's going to happen.
All right, Kelly Carter, great to have you, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, the new report from the CDC about mental health of high schoolers in the pandemic. Stay with us. Welcome back. The CDC has released new data revealing widespread mental health issues among high school students. Research shows female and LGBTQ students have been hit especially hard during the pandemic. ABC News senior national policy reporter Ann Flaherty and Wisdom Powell, health director at the UConn Health Disparities Institute, has more on this. And I want to start with you. 44% of kids in this survey reported feeling persistently sad or hopeless during the past year. What do you make of that number, and what else stood out to you in this report?
Well, Diane, this was really the first of its kind. The CDC doing a nationwide survey looking at, 8,000 students in the heart of the pandemic. This was conducted last year from January to about June. They asked them over 100 questions, and they said they found, as you mentioned, the 44% feeling persistently sad and hopeless. 55% said that they reported abuse in the home, emotional abuse, and 29% said that their parents had lost a job. So, one caveat is this is the first time the CDC has done it. We don't have anything to compare it to. We know from other research that this number is, an increase in what the high school kids were reporting at that time. I don't think that's a surprise to most parents, but it tells us that kids were not doing okay before the pandemic. They are not okay now.
And Wisdom, so given this data now, what are some of the ways that you think the pandemic has uniquely impacted teens when it comes to the pandemic and their mental health?
Well, one of the things we know is that the pandemic fundamentally altered the routine ways that teens connect with others, their peers, their teachers, and caring adults. And because of that, they've lost natural opportunities to get the kind of social support and connection that can facilitate positive mental health outcomes. So the social isolation alone, stemming from the pandemic and all the physical distancing requirements, are probably at the root of this. But there's also, the fact that our youth are under extreme stress, and stress that's associated not just with the pandemic, stress associated with large-scale social events. We're having a war in the Ukraine right now that our youth are bearing witness to. We're also still reeling from racialized violence and upticks in abuse against marginalized and historically excluded populations. So it's not surprising to me that our youth are feeling particularly pressed and stretched thin with respect to their emotional well-being.
And what did we learn about which demographics are the most vulnerable?
So, Diane, we learned that two groups were the most vulnerable, female students and LGBTQ students. One of the most stunning figures was that 3/4 of these LGBTQ students reported emotional abuse in the home. We also heard from the CDC that 1 in 3 students reported brushes with racism, with Asian Americans reporting a stunning figure of 64% said that they had experienced racist incidents. So this tells you a lot of what schools need to do, right? They need to support these more marginalized students. They need to reach out to them and make them feel that they're supported. And in fact, the report found that when schools did that, it created a more nurturing environment for all students.
And so, Wisdom, if you're an adult who either works with these teens or is an administrator at one of these schools, how do you go about sort of supporting them and uncovering some of these incidents?
So I think it's really important first to recognize that our teachers are under incredible pressure and strain to do all things. We count on our teachers to educate and be semi-counselors, sometimes nurses and doctors. And so I just want to make it plain that we're not going to be able to get our way out of this problem simply on the backs of our teachers and their labor. But teachers do play a critical role as a front line of defense. They're usually the folks that our kids spend the most time with in any given day. So the one thing we can do is be on the lookout for symptoms and signs of isolation and distress, and we can create a climate virtually in our classrooms, and now that we're moving more back into the classroom, where students are honored, respected, and validated. A zero-tolerance climate for the kinds of bullying and assaults that many of the LGBTQ students and students from historically excluded populations report. So we have a job to do, right? We have to create the culture and a climate where students can be respected, but we also have to educate ourselves about what depression looks like when it shows up in these settings, what anxiety looks like when it shows up in these settings, so that we can respond and speak to those wounds.
Now, Anne, the report also found that teens with strong connections at school were much less likely to feel hopeless or have suicidal thoughts. So what are schools doing to try to combat this?
Well, the report had very specific ideas that some schools are already working on individually. Of course, most schools are state-funded. They're not federally funded. So they're talking about social emotional learning programs, teacher training, reviewing disciplinary programs or disciplinary actions. The issue, though, is that this requires money.
All right. Anne Flaherty, Wisdom Powell, great to have you both. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
And thank you. I'm Diane Macedo.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.